"Oh," said the sick man. "Oh," said the sick man with much more animation, stretching out his hand to Kay. "Forgive me, I didn't notice you. Go now, Lenny," he said to the nurse, clasping her by the hand as if saying goodbye to her for a long time, and she went submissively enough. "So you haven't come," he said at last to Kay's uncle, who was now appeased and had gone up to the bed again, "to pay me a sick visit. You've come on business." It was as if the thought of a sick visit had paralyzed him until now. So rejuvenated did he look as he supported himself on his elbow, which must itself have been something of a strain, and he kept combing with his fingers a strand of hair in the middle of his beard. "You look much better already," said Kay's uncle, since that witch went away. He broke off, whispered, "I bet she's listening," and sprang to the door. But there was no one behind the door, and he returned again, not so much disappointed, since her failure to listen seemed to him an act of sheer malice, as embittered. "You are unjust to her," said the lawyer, without adding anything more in defense of his nurse. Perhaps by his reticence he meant to convey that she stood in no need of defense. Then in a much more friendly tone he went on, "As for this case of your nephew's, I should certainly consider myself very fortunate if my strength proved equal to such an excessively arduous task. I'm very much afraid that it will not do so, but at any rate I shall make every effort. If I fail, you can always call in someone else to help me. To be quite honest, the case interests me too deeply for me to resist the opportunity of taking some part in it. If my heart does not hold out, here at least it will find a worthy obstacle to fail against." Kay could not fathom a single word of all this. He glanced at his uncle, hoping for some explanation, but with the candle in his hand, his uncle was sitting on the bedside table, from which a medicine bottle had already rolled onto the carpet, nodding assent to everything and now and then casting a glance at Kay, which demanded from him a like agreement. Could his uncle have told the lawyer all about the case already? But that was impossible. The course of events ruled it out. "I don't understand," he therefore began. "Oh, perhaps I have misunderstood you?" asked the lawyer, just as surprised and embarrassed as Kay. "Perhaps I have been too hasty? Then what do you want to consult me about? I thought it concerned your case." "Oh, of course it does," said Kay's uncle, turning to Kay with the question. "What's bothering you?" "Well, but how do you come to know about me and my case?" asked Kay. "Oh, that's it," said the lawyer, smiling. I'm a lawyer, you see. I move in legal circles where all the various cases are discussed. And the more striking ones are bound to stick in my mind, especially one that concerns the nephew of an old friend of mine. Surely that's not so extraordinary." "What's bothering you?" Kay's uncle repeated. "You're all nerves." "So you move in those legal circles?" asked Kay. "Yes," replied the lawyer. "You ask questions like a child," said Kay's uncle. "Whom should I associate with, if not with men of my own profession?" added the lawyer. It sounded incontrovertible, and Kay made no answer. "But you're attached to the court and the palace of justice. Not to the one in the annex," he wanted to say, yet could not bring himself actually to say it. "You must consider," the lawyer continued in the tone of one perfunctorily explaining something that should be self-evident, "you must consider that this intercourse enables me to benefit my clients in all sorts of ways, some of which cannot even be divulged. Of course, I'm somewhat handicapped now because of my illness, but in spite of that, good friends of mine from the law courts visit me now and then, and I learn lots of things from them." "Perhaps more than many a man in the best of health who spends all his days in the courts. For example, there's a dear friend of mine visiting me at this very moment." And he waved a hand toward a dark corner of the room. "Where?" asked Kay, almost rudely, in his first shock of astonishment. He looked round uncertainly. The light of the small candle did not nearly reach the opposite wall, and then some form or other in the dark corner actually began to stir. By the light of the candle, which his uncle now held high above his head, Kay could see an elderly gentleman sitting there at a little table. He must have been sitting without even drawing breath, to have remained for so long unnoticed. Now he got up fussily, obviously displeased to have his presence made known. With his hands, which he flapped like short wings, he seemed to be deprecating all introductions or greetings, trying to show that the last thing he desired was to disturb the other gentleman, and that he only wanted to be transported again to the darkness where his presence might be forgotten. But that privilege could no longer be his. "I may say you took us by surprise," said the lawyer in explanation, and he waved his hand to encourage the gentleman to approach, which he did very slowly and glancing around him hesitantly, but with a certain dignity. "The chief clerk of the court. Oh, I beg your pardon, I have not introduced you. This is my friend Albert Kay. This is his nephew, Joseph Kay. and this is the chief clerk of the court who, to return to what I was saying, has been so good as to pay me a visit. The value of such a visit can really be appreciated only by the initiated who know how dreadfully the clerk of the court is overwhelmed with work. Yet he came to see me all the same. We were talking here peacefully as far as my ill health permitted. We didn't actually forbid Lenny to admit visitors, it was true, for we expected none, but we naturally thought that we should be left in peace, and then came your furious tattoo, Albert, and the clerk of the court withdrew into the corner with his chair and his table. But now it seems we have the chance, that is, if you care to take it, of making the discussion general, since this case concerns us all, and so we can get together. Please, my dear sir, he said with a bow and an obsequious smile, indicating an armchair near the bed. Unfortunately, I can only stay for a few minutes longer, said the chief clerk of the court affably, seating himself in the chair and looking at his watch. My duties call me, but I don't want to miss this opportunity of becoming acquainted with a friend of my friend here. He bowed slightly to Kay's uncle, who appeared very flattered to make this new acquaintance, yet, being by nature incapable of expressing reverent feelings, requited the clerk of the court's words with a burst of embarrassed but raucous laughter. An ugly sight. Kay could observe everything calmly, for nobody paid any attention to him. The chief clerk of the court, now that he had been brought into prominence, seized the lead, as seemed to be his usual habit. The lawyer, whose first pretense of weakness had probably been intended simply to drive away his visitors, listened attentively, cupping his hand to his ear. Kay's uncle, as candle-bearer, he was balancing the candle on his thigh, the lawyer often glanced at it in apprehension, had soon rid himself of his embarrassment and was now delightedly absorbed in the clerk of court's eloquence and the delicate wave-like gestures of the hand with which he accompanied it. Kay, leaning against the bedpost, was completely ignored by the clerk of court, perhaps by deliberate intention, and served merely as an audience to the old gentleman. Besides, he could hardly follow the conversation and was thinking first of the nurse and the rude treatment she had received from his uncle, and then wondering if he had not seen the clerk of the court before, perhaps actually among the audience during his first interrogation. He might be mistaken, yet the clerk of court would have fitted excellently into the first row of the audience, the elderly gentleman with the brittle beards. Then a sound from the entrance hall as of breaking crockery made them all prick up their ears. I'll go and see what has happened, said Kay, and he went out rather slowly to give the others a chance to call him back. Hardly had he reached the entrance hall and was beginning to grope his way in the darkness when a hand much smaller than his own covered the hand with which he was still holding the door and gently drew the door shut. It was the nurse who had been waiting there. Nothing has happened, she whispered. I simply flung a plate against the wall to bring you out. Kay said in his embarrassment, I was thinking of you too. That's all the better, said the nurse. Come this way. A step or two brought them to a door paneled with thick glass, which she opened. In here, she said. It was evidently the lawyer's office, as far as one could see in the moonlight, which brilliantly lit up a small square section of the floor in front of each of the two large windows. It was fitted out with solid antique furniture. Here, said the nurse, pointing to a dark chest with a carved wooden back. After he had sat down, Kay still kept looking round the room. It was a lofty, spacious room. The clients of this poor man's lawyer must feel lost in it. Kay pictured to himself the timid, short steps with which they would advance to the huge table. But then he forgot all this and had eyes only for the nurse, who was sitting very close to him, almost squeezing him against the arm of the bench. I thought, she said, you would come out of your own accord, without waiting till I had to call you out. A queer way to behave. You couldn't keep your eyes off me from the very moment you came in, and yet you leave me to wait. And you'd better just call me Lenny, she added quickly and abruptly, as if there were not a moment to waste. I'll be glad to, said Kay, but as for my queer behavior, Lenny, that's easy to explain. In the first place, I had to listen to these old men jabbering. I couldn't simply walk out and leave them without any excuse. And in the second place, I'm not in the least a bold young man, but rather shy, to tell the truth. And you too, Lenny, really didn't look as if you were to be had for the asking. It isn't that, said Lenny, laying her arm along the back of the seat and looking at Kay. But you didn't like me at first, and you probably don't like me even now. Liking is a feeble word, said Kay evasively. Oh, she said with a smile, and Kay's remark and that little exclamation gave her a certain advantage over him. So Kay said nothing more for a while. As he had grown used to the darkness in the room, he could now distinguish certain details of the furnishings. He was particularly struck by a large picture which hung to the right of the door and bent forward to see it more clearly. It represented a man in a judge's robe. He was sitting on a high throne-like seat, and the gilding of the seat stood out strongly in the picture. The strange thing was that the judge did not seem to be sitting in dignified composure, for his left arm was braced along the back and the side arm of his throne, while his right arm rested on nothing except for the hand which clutched the other arm of the chair. It was as if in a moment he must spring up with a violent and probably wrathful gesture to make some decisive observation or even to pronounce sentence. The accused might be imagined as standing on the lowest step leading up to the chair of justice. The top steps, which were covered with a yellowish carpet, were shown in the picture. Perhaps that is my judge, said Kay, pointing with his finger at the picture. I know him, said Lenny, and she looked at the picture too. He often comes here. That picture was painted when he was young, but it could never have been in the least like him, for he's a small man, almost a dwarf. Yet in spite of that, he had himself drawn out to that length in the portrait, for he's madly vain like everybody else here. But I'm a vain person too, and very much upset that you don't like me in the least. To this last statement, Kay replied merely by putting his arm around her and drawing her to him. She leaned her head against his shoulder in silence. But to the rest of her remarks, he answered, What's the man's rank? He is an examining magistrate, she said, seizing the hand with which Kay held her and beginning to play with his fingers. Only an examining magistrate again, said Kay in disappointment. The higher officials keep themselves well hidden, but he's sitting in a chair of state. That's all invention, said Lenny, with her face bent over his hand. Actually, he is sitting on a kitchen chair with an old horse rug doubled under him. But must you eternally be brooding over your case? She queried slowly. No, not at all, said Kay. In fact, I probably brood far too little over it. That isn't the mistake you make, said Lenny. You're too unyielding, that's what I've heard. Who told you that? Asked Kay. He could feel her body against his breast and gaze down at her rich, dark, firmly knotted hair. I should give away too much if I told you that, replied Lenny. Please don't ask me for names. Take my warning to heart instead, and don't be so unyielding in future. You can't fight against this court. You must confess to guilt. Make your confession at the first chance you get. Until you do that, there's no possibility of getting out of their clutches. None at all. Yet even then you won't manage it without help from outside, but you needn't trouble your head about that. I'll see to it myself. You know a great deal about this court and the intrigues that prevail in it, said Kay, lifting her onto his knee, for she was leaning too heavily against him. That's better, she said, making herself at home on his knee by smoothing her skirt and pulling her blouse straight. Then she clasped both her hands round his neck, leaned back, and looked at him for a long time. And if I don't make a confession of guilt, then you can't help me? Kay asked experimentally. I seem to recruit women helpers, he thought, almost in surprise. First Fraulein Burstner, then the wife of the usher, and now this little nurse who appears to have some incomprehensible desire for me. She sits there on my knee as if it were the only right place for her. No, said Lenny, shaking her head slowly. Then I can't help you. But you don't in the least want my help. It doesn't matter to you. You're stiff-necked and never will be convinced. After a while, she asked, Have you got a sweetheart? No, said Kay. Oh, yes, you have, she said. Well, yes, I have, said Kay. Just imagine it. I have denied her existence, and yet I am actually carrying her photograph in my pocket. At her entreaty, he showed her Elsa's photograph. She studied it, curled up on his knee. It was a snapshot taken of Elsa as she was finishing a whirling dance, such as she often gave at the cabaret. Her skirt was still flying round her like a fan. Her hands were planted on her firm hips, and with her chin thrown up, she was laughing over her shoulder at someone who did not appear in the photograph. She's very tightly laced, said Lenny, indicating the place where, in her opinion, the tight lacing was evident. I don't like her. She's rough and clumsy. But perhaps she's soft and kind to you. One might guess that from the photograph. Big, strong girls like that often can't help being soft and kind. But would she be capable of sacrificing herself for you? No, said Kay. She is neither soft nor kind, nor would she be capable of sacrificing herself for me. And up till now, I have demanded neither the one thing nor the other from her. In fact, I've never even examined this photograph as carefully as you have. So she doesn't mean so very much to you, said Lenny. She isn't your sweetheart after all. Oh, yes, replied Kay. I refuse to take back my words. Well, granted that she's your sweetheart, said Lenny. You wouldn't miss her very much all the same if you were to lose her or exchange her for someone else. Me, for instance? Certainly, said Kay, smiling. That's conceivable. But she has one great advantage over you. She knows nothing about my case, and even if she knew, she wouldn't bother her head about it. She wouldn't try to get me to be less unyielding. That's no advantage, said Lenny. If that's all the advantage she has over me, I shan't give up hope. Has she any physical defect? Any physical defect? Asked Kay. Yes, said Lenny, for I have a slight one. Look. She held up her right hand and stretched out the two middle fingers, between which the connecting web of skin reached almost to the top joint, short as the fingers were. In the darkness, Kay could not make out at once what she wanted to show him, so she took his hand and made him feel it. What a freak of nature, said Kay. And he added, when he had examined the whole hand, what a pretty little paw. Lenny looked on with a kind of pride, while Kay, in astonishment, kept pulling the two fingers apart and then putting them side by side again, until at last he kissed them lightly and let them go. Oh, she cried at once, you have kissed me. She hastily scrambled up until she was kneeling open-mouthed on his knees. Kay looked up at her, almost dumbfounded. Now that she was so close to him, she gave out a bitter, exciting odor like pepper. She clasped his head to her, bent over him, and bit and kissed him on the neck, biting into the very hairs of his head. You have exchanged her for me, she cried over and over again. Look, you have exchanged her for me after all. Then her knees slipped. With a faint cry, she almost fell on the carpet. Kay put his arms round her to hold her up and was pulled down to her. You belong to me now, she said. Here's the key of the door. Come whenever you like, were her last words, and as he took his leave, a final aimless kiss landed on his shoulder. When he stepped out onto the pavement, a light rain was falling. He was making for the middle of the street so as perhaps to catch a last glimpse of Lenny at her window, but a car which was waiting before the house, and which in his distraction he had not even noticed, suddenly emitted his uncle, who seized him by the arms and banged him against the house door as if he wanted to nail him there. Joseph, he cried. How could you do it? You have damaged your case badly, which was beginning to go quite well. You hide yourself away with a filthy little trollop, who was obviously the lawyer's mistress into the bargain, and stay away for hours. You don't even seek any pretext. You conceal nothing. No, you're quite open. You simply run off to her and stay beside her. And all this time we three sit there, your uncle who is doing his best for you, the lawyer who has to be won over to your side, above all the chief clerk of the court, a man of importance who is actually in charge of your case at its present stage. There we sit, consulting how to help you. I have to handle the lawyer circumspectly, and the lawyer in turn the clerk of court, and one might think you had every reason to give me at least some support, instead of which you absent yourself. You were away so long that there was no concealing it. Of course, the two gentlemen, being men of the world, didn't talk about it. They spared my feelings. But finally, even they could no longer ignore it, and as they couldn't mention it, they said nothing at all. We sat there for minutes on end in complete silence, listening for you to come back at last, and all in vain. Finally, the chief clerk of the court, who had stayed much longer than he intended, got up and said goodnight, evidently very sorry for me without being able to help me. His kindness was really extraordinary. He stood waiting for a while longer at the door before he left. And I was glad when he went, let me tell you. By that time, I felt hardly able to breathe. And the poor sick lawyer felt it even more. The good man couldn't utter a word as I took leave of him. In all probability, you have helped to bring about his complete collapse, and so hasten the death of a man on whose good offices you are dependent. And you leave me, your uncle, to wait here in the rain for hours and worry myself sick. Just feel I'm wet through and through.